Thank you so much for being here. My name is Emma Swan. I'm Sport Welfare Officer at Active Suffolk. And today we're going to be looking at the topic of being active bystanders, but through the lens of understanding the differences in bullying and banter. Now, the reason I'm talking about these today is because we've been having a whole awareness week on being active bystanders, how this comes into sport. And the reason I'm doing this is because part of the sport welfare role is to look at safe and inclusive cultures, and ultimately looking at bullying and banter is a really big part of this conversation, and it feels like an appropriate way to close out on this week. So just to kind of start off, we're going to look at what we think about definitions. We're going to think about some boundaries and the difference between intent and impact, and how this really comes into how we then shape our interactions with other people. We're thinking about tone setting, and actually understanding how we actually manage our behaviour and how we can shape culture with this context of understanding the differences. But before we do that, I really just want to remind everyone that it's really important you think about your own well-being today. I cannot presume as to why different people are in this space today or why they might come to this recording. And ultimately, it might be through personal motivation and past experience. It could also be because you're aware of perhaps a role that you have and wanting to create safe spaces in the future. But what's really important is that this is only a very short session today. This could absolutely be a longer session. It could be a whole day's worth of conversations. So I do recognise that we can't cover all areas of this topic. And I just want people to understand that just because we don't cover every single barrier to being active bystanders, or if we can't go through all the different nuances of bullying, what I want people to do is just remember this is an introduction space. So please look after yourself. We want to remember our own boundaries in this space, is that, as we'll hopefully unpack during this session, we're going to be thinking about just because we're okay with something doesn't mean it's okay for somebody else, and vice versa. So we want to be really accountable, and this is one of the most important things when we look at boundaries and our interaction with others, especially if we're trying to unpack, is it banter or is it bullying, is we just need to be accountable that if we have got it wrong, or if I get anything wrong today, even in this session, that we want to communicate with each other to help each other understand and learn that a bit more and in a safe way. So to start with, we need to actually think, what are these terms and what do they even mean? Because sometimes people can say, I don't really understand the differences, or are they the same thing but they're taken in a different way by different people? And they're very much not the same thing. They are different. And if we start with banter, we know that there's lots of definitions and understandings of this term. And I've included 3 here because I think they show the different pieces and the components that go into what is true banter. And it's this idea that it's meant to be in good humour, and that it's about being playful and a bit witty, but ultimately it's pinned really in being friendly. It's not something that's meant to cause harm. It isn't meant to be divisive. And proper banter is actually connective focused. It's about people and relationships and fun, and it's an exchange. And this word exchange is really important because banter is balanced. If I have a laugh with you, you can have a laugh with me, and we're not harmed in this process. And the fact that it says good-humoured teasing is quite relevant, because the word teasing itself can be kind of potentially dangerous in the space, because when we think about teasing, it can be saying something unkind. And if we look at like some of the definitions, it's laughing at someone or saying something unkind. And that actually is a little bit challenging, because being unkind comes away from the idea of banter. So we want to remember that banter is really understanding each other's boundaries and limitations, and how far does this joke go? What if I do cause harm or hurt to someone accidentally? What might this mean for me or others involved in this space? Because even if you're exchanging a joke with somebody and you two are comfortable with it, it's not to say that someone around you doesn't find that harmful as well. So if we now extend this into when does it cross the line and become bullying, there's multiple ways we can look at this, but the Anti-Bullying Alliance defines it in this quite clear way, that it's repetitive and intentional. It can be by a person or a group, and it's often about an imbalance of power. And sometimes people think of power in a role hierarchy system, but actually power could be social influence. You know, thinking about dynamics in a team setting, the power balance could actually be the captain. It could be that we have someone who's maybe got more friends potentially, and actually that idea of, well, if I don't align with the one person, that whole pack might then see me as not relevant or cool or fun, or I've got to act really calm about this situation so that other people don't then get involved. But we need to also remember that bullying isn't just direct with verbal or physical behaviour. It can happen online, it can happen in these kind of psychological ways, and it could be leaving people out intentionally. And sometimes people think of bullying as really clear, aggressive or hostile reactions to people, but actually it could be intentionally leaving them out, excluding them, ignoring people, silence. So if we think about these differences of banter and bullying, the way I think about them is banter is connective. It's about relationships and understanding and having fun, whereas bullying is harmful and it's divisive. But often things that are bullying in nature are called banter, and they're called banter to get away with the fact that they're being abusive or that they don't want to be accountable to the fact that they have caused harm. And it can be really challenging sometimes to be accountable if you don't mean to cause harm. And we're going to look at intent and impact a little bit later. But ultimately, we don't get to decide if something's truly funny for somebody else. And it's about understanding those nuances. And there's a really good visual that I wanted to show you from the Anti-Bullying Alliance, which these directional arrows for me are the difference. And it's how I think about the understanding of when has it gone too far. Because as we can see in this kind of first scene, insults that are potentially funny because of maybe a private joke or poking fun at something and making a laugh of something. If you've done something a bit silly and you can find it funny and someone else joins in on that joke with you, it's both of you sharing the moment. And that shared arrow means also if one of you wants to stop it, the other person would respect it. They might go, didn't mean that, took it too far, I'm sorry. But what we know is that as it goes further down that line of harmful behaviour and goes into a bullying space, it's very one directional. And if someone wants to challenge it or try to seek help or try to ask for it to stop, it's not respected. And we need to remember that this could also be someone baiting someone, trying to get a reaction out of them, subtle behaviours to have somebody else kind of really explode visually in front of them and actually show up in that space of not being able to cope, because then that bully gets to use that tactic to show again something shameful or harmful about this person. And it's not about us saying banter has to stop. I've been in spaces before where they say this needs to be a no banter zone. But banter between people is lightness, it's fun, it's humour. It can create space to share a moment with someone that's funny that you can reflect on at a later point. But that's because it needs to be true banter and not bullying in the cloak of banter. So we want to think about permission and boundaries. And a key thing we need to remember is that every single person we meet has had a completely different life experience. They have different identity and factors of who they are that shape how they experience the world around them, whether that's really positive experiences or negative experiences, a mixture of both. Perhaps it's how they feel in wider society, not just in that immediate space. And we call this our frame of reference, and it's that window through which we see the world. So often people are like, well, how am I meant to know what's meant to cause harm to others and what wouldn't cause harm? And well, I'd be okay with that. And why can't they be all right? It's only a joke. What we have to remember is we don't know what someone else has been through. So we need to be really compassionate and focused on being accountable to what we do. And it doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. And even trying to be really conscious and accountable, we still might get it wrong sometimes, but it's how do we react? How are we being conscious of our behaviours and of our actions? So we want to remember that all behaviour is a form of communication. So if we say something we intended to be a joke and someone reacts either negatively or becomes quiet or they don't really know how to respond, that should give us an indication. But there's also times where someone might laugh along with that joke and we're not aware it's caused them harm. So it's not about stopping fun. It's about being more compassionate, understanding that we don't get to decide for somebody else what is harmful. And this window of tolerance that I've got on here, these kind of green, red and blue states, are a real simple way for us to remember that we all have a capacity in our day that we can cope with. So we can take some points of pressure, we can take some drops in energy, and we call this our optimum state of arousal, this space of, I can think clearly, I'm okay, I feel pleasant enough, might not feel excellent, but I feel okay. But if I have a little bit of stress, I can cope with it. And if I have a little bit of a drop of energy, it's not going to ruin my day. But what can happen is there can be moments or situations or triggers that make us go up into this red state, this kind of fight or flight mechanism where we feel unsafe, we go into quite a vigilant state. And this can make us have a whole range of different experiences that are that kind of overstimulation. And it's in quite an energized way. And this can be seen as quite a negative thing. But we might get cues from people that maybe they are going into that space, maybe they don't feel okay. And if they react, we come back to that, what is this behavior telling me? Is someone okay? And we want to come away from what's wrong with them and start to think what's happening. What is the situation here? What do I need to ask? How can I be curiously compassionate to help understand this person in front of me? Because on this opposite side, we also have a bit of a disconnect, and we have this numb space, this blue zone, this hypoarousal, and it's quite a flat space. And if we think about a coaching setting in a sporting environment, we might see big behaviours and quiet behaviours, and we might make presumptions on them. So we need to be more able to ask people, are you okay? Is there something you need here? Could I help? Has this been taken the wrong way? And that curiosity is really important, because we don't know the impacts that people have. We can't presume people live in safe homes. We can't even presume that a team that looks potentially positive isn't having negative behaviours in a social setting. So we only get snapshots of people from their behaviour. And we want to be more aware that all of that frame of reference and life experience shapes how they then respond and feel safe in interactions with different people. And if we think in that active bystander mentality, we know that some people don't feel able to speak up as much because they've been marginalised and treated negatively, and has kind of in a really hostile way sometimes by society when they try to raise their negative experiences that have been projected to them. So we need to remember that it's about being mindful of how do we interact with others, and how do we give them freedom and space to speak up if they are feeling challenged. And it's funny because when we think of a sporting analogy, lots of people have the capacity to change their behaviours when they need or want to. Different people act in different ways in different spaces. We interact with a whole variety of different people in almost like these different personas. You know, we have our telephone voice, we need to put our customer service voice on. We have the mentality if we're going to go and step onto a football pitch. And if we think about some of the phrases we hear about challenging abusive or bullying behaviour, we often hear, oh, you can't say anything anymore, and I don't know what I can say, I don't know what's okay. And people are quite defensive about it. And don't get me wrong, it can be challenging sometimes to be caring about wanting to say the right things, but it's because actually it changes from person to person, and we're all individuals and we can't all be treated the same all the time. So we want to think about the fact that in the same way we can consciously obey certain rules in certain spaces based on sports safety. If we think about a boxing ring, you wouldn't walk around and just hit anybody you see, because you know that's not okay. But you know, in a boxing ring with certain parameters and safety and a shared understanding, that actually fighting somebody is okay, because it's the sporting tone that has all of those parameters and safety and the referees around you to help you be safe within that active space. So it's the same on a football pitch. You wouldn't just tackle somebody in the middle of the street because you know that's not okay. You might behave differently with different players at different times as well, based on, okay, I know that this person in my team is somebody that likes quite direct guidance, or they want to be really like amped up when they play, but for others they want to prepare for games in silence, maybe with their own music in solace. So we know we can change our behaviours, and we know we can adapt all the time, and we need to translate that into how we approach bullying and banter and these differences, because the zones do fluctuate. So what happens if something we're not quite sure where it sits? We have this kind of green to red space where it might be that some things are towing the line a bit. If we think back again to that anti-bullying alliance image, where it was almost like a scale that kind of went down a line. So some things are always going to be a hard no. You know, we're never going to tolerate racism, we're not going to tolerate homophobia, we're not going to tolerate hate speech or behaviours that are discriminatory based on protected characteristics, because not only are they not okay morally, we know they're also illegal. So actually we need to think about the fact that some things are always going to be a definite no. But it might be that there are some things that sit in the green zone with some friends, but it's amber if somebody else did it. For example, I have grown up around football, and something that a friend has once said to me as a joke when I had an opinion that kind of contrasted theirs about an event in a game was, I'll get back in the kitchen. Now, as much as that's a really sexist statement, and it was something I didn't appreciate in that moment, my reaction to that person who's my friend was far different to if a stranger said it to me when I do attend football. And the way we react can also shape whether it's green or red or amber to us, because how we feel about the person might shape our ability to respond to them in a different way or to assert our boundaries more clearly. So we want to remember that if we're trying to understand what's okay and what's not okay, It will always vary from person to person, and it might also vary day to day, because if somebody's in that kind of window of tolerance space where they're creeping up to that red zone because maybe there's so many other life pressures going on, actually something that's funny to them one day might not be on another day. And it's not to say we can't say things to each other and we can't interact, but it's more thinking about how can I be accountable? How can I make sure that if someone does check me, I stop it there and I don't take it too far? Because sometimes someone takes a public joke, a private space joke, and puts it into the public arena. And that's just now changed a boundary for someone, because we have that in private, but we don't say that to others. And that was something I shared with you in confidence. We can laugh about it, but I want others to now ask questions. And it's what is the motivation of someone? If a motivation is to have fun and be silly together, that's very different to I want to embarrass you in public, or I want to make myself look better in this space than you. So those motivations are really important. But we also have to remember that some people don't feel safe to speak up. And we need to be conscious of that collective responsibility to have safe spaces, because if somebody's been through experiences of discrimination before, if they've had violent relationships or lived in abusive or hostile home spaces, then actually maybe they don't feel able to challenge that. We also need to think of cultural sensitivity, is that there may be people that have been raised to say, for example, respect elders in their community, where it's not standard practice to challenge adults. It might not be standard practice to challenge certain professionals. So how do they become safe in these spaces if actually their conditioning and their experience of the world is to respect certain people in certain positions? And maybe it's confusing for them to know that that's not okay. Maybe they've never been taught that. And in the same way as we think about not being taught how to speak up, it also might be that some people aren't aware that something is offensive or harmful. So we want to look in this way that is focused on education and support to move forward, rather than these really divisive, shameful actions to each other. And I spoke earlier about the idea of an intent and impact, and I want to refer to the smashed plate theory, because it's really useful to remember that we could take a plate and we could smash it on the floor intentionally, and it will get these cracks, and we could glue it back together. Or we might walk past a tabletop and we might knock the plate and it would still smash. Intent was not there when we knocked it by accident, but it was there when we smashed it. But it still looks the same. And the cracks are still there. The impact is still very present. So even though a moment might have passed, that person might take that impact with them. So again, this is why it's important that if we get it wrong, we need to be accountable. But we don't get to decide whether we've caused someone harm. It's so personal, it's so individualized, that what matters is we do get to decide how we respond to them, and we do get to decide how we apologize if we do get it wrong, and show that I'm going to work on that. And if we say something in jest as a private joke with a friend, and then someone else says, oh, I don't feel like I like that, it's not to say you can't have that joke with your friends still in private, but it just means don't bring that in this space. I don't want to hear that. And we might think about whether it's appropriate to challenge somebody based on their own views. If we think of this active bystander mentality, the term's an offensive term, we might take it as a teaching opportunity. Oh, do you know actually where that came from? Do you understand why that word's not okay for some people? And even if it's not a word that's offensive about you, you might still just take a moment to try and help someone understand that. And we want to think of cultures of feedback because it enhances safety. If it's normal for people to calmly kind of educate and share and support each other, or let someone know why they don't like something or why that is potentially difficult, then actually we create a culture that's safer overall, because what we're doing is helping people to understand it's okay to speak up when you're worried or if you feel uncomfortable. And it doesn't have to be aggressive or hostile when we check people. It can be respectful. But if someone says something's enough now, then it needs to be enough there. You know, the gambling line, when the fun stops, stop. It's what we should be looking at again in this banter bullying space. We don't want to take fun out. We don't want to say that we can't have jokes. But if it stops being a joke for someone, we need to look at that. We need to unpack why, and we need to maybe just change that behaviour. And I talk about responding, reaching, and teaching is we had some conversations earlier in this week, and I've got Kevin from NWG on this conversation here again today, is calling people in is really important. This isn't about making really rigid lines, and it's not about creating conversations of hostility. It's about, can we make spaces to connect with someone? Even if we're connecting in a divisive thought, it's let's understand each other, let's share, let's actually think about maybe someone didn't understand why that was harmful. When someone says a comment that potentially has an offensive term in it, yes, we want that person to stop that, and the goal is to correct that language. But a simple question of, oh, like, what does that word mean to you? And do you know where that word originates from? Again, it helps someone to think about their words and think about their choices. Now, we also need to help young people understand this. Is if we just shame young people and tell them off for using certain terms or phrases or behaviours, what we're not doing is helping them have critical thinking and use that decision making. They're being told off rather than taught. And it's about remembering that when we bring someone in and have a conversation and show them and talk to them and unpack it, they then maintain that piece of education. Whereas if we just say, don't do that, they don't really understand why, and they maybe then can't apply that context. So if we teach them not to be racist, so they understand those principles still apply to not being homophobic, they apply to not being sexist, disablest. It's about those transferable pieces of understanding about human compassion and what we actually want to do to create safer spaces. But there will, of course, be situations where it's not just about teaching, it's also about reporting. And of course, we need to make sure that we're involving welfare officers or safeguarding leads. We need to be making sure that we're recording any kind of concerning behaviour, whether that's a low-level concern or a safeguarding concern, because we want it to be responded to completely appropriately by those who are responsible at that kind of safeguarding management level. But also we want to think about what's the culture we're then showing, is how are we helping people to understand we are accountable for our behaviours and we're accountable for how we treat others. So we can think about this in a strategy way, is how are we going to achieve this? So first of all, role modelling behaviours. And role modelling isn't just being a kind, good person. Role modelling is if someone corrects you, thank them. Thank you for letting me know that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. When we role model the welcoming of feedback, it gives people permission to give it to us. So we want to role model respectful behaviours. We want to role model setting boundaries. We want to talk clearly about, or if that's not okay for someone, what would we do? It might be even opening up conversations with our teams and our clubs to say, what would we do if this scenario arose? What do we think would be a good approach? And we want to think about it in that sport and team culture, because actually, if people understand that the more safe we all feel, the better we do, that might help them to care more about it as well. But actually, it's just that really human level of, don't we all deserve to be safe? Don't we all deserve to be happy and access sport and do it in a way that helps us feel our best self and not like we have to leave part of self at the door? We want to think about respecting that diversity. We want safety for people. We want to encourage people to feel like they can be active bystanders who speak up for what matters to them. So preventative approaches could be things like talking about codes of conduct and club values and principles of what shapes the organisation you are in, so that people, when they enter, they know straight away what's expected of them. But then we want that proactive conversation that keeps going, where we keep checking in on that, whether you're a welfare officer or you're part of the club committee, is how are your coaches finding that? Are they being conscious of that? Are staff or volunteers involved also talking about how to have more respect and to be more safe and having fun within the realms of not harming people? So we can be quite proactive in asking conversations and seeking feedback, because then that allows us the capacity to learn and to shape change. And as I say, it's not about telling people off and creating barriers or cutting people out. It's, can we teach? Can we check if maybe that was just a blind spot for that person where they didn't understand that? Was it a space where they weren't visibly aware or hadn't been taught that themselves? Is it something where actually they don't really care because to them that term is okay? Then you have a decision to make. Will I let this person carry on being in this space? Will I let that risk continue to hurt people? And then that also feeds into that club culture and that conduct, is because ultimately the standards you accept are going to continue and they're going to keep going, and that is potentially going to cause greater harm. So we want to share learning. That might be through, you might send bulletins, it might be through just having some conversations with people, maybe getting coaches to deliver some feedback after sessions. And if a session's carrying on and there seems to be some like maybe bullying behaviour, can the coach just stop that session and say, hey, this doesn't align to our values. This isn't what we do. This isn't our way. This isn't our club culture. And we want to make sure people do know the reporting pathways. It's absolutely essential that what we're doing is making sure that people know who they can talk to, and not when it gets to the worst moments. We want them to talk at that early point so it does become preventative. We want to catch things early. We want to let people know, I don't really feel comfortable with that, before it has to become really big and a full safeguarding referral. And, you know, there might be those moments where it is going to go straight to that space of reporting. But we absolutely want to work in a space where we're also talking about catching things before they become a big problem. We want to do things that are about slowing down people's behaviour, getting them to think, getting them to be more conscious, being more mindful of each other, and then thinking about what response does that need. And all of these potentially negative behaviours do need a response of some form, whether that's in quiet, whether that's going into a one-on-one space. If it's a child, maybe bringing a parent into that space if it feels appropriate and safe to do so, and take it to be a teachable moment. And that therefore creating that longer term change, because we're allowing them to apply that critical thinking to other spaces. So what I want us to do now is just think, what does this now mean for me? Does this shape my thoughts, my actions, my behaviours? Is there something different I can do? And whether that's a conversation you can now take into your club space, to your teams, if you're not even working directly in sport right now, but you're maybe working somewhere else and you're connected, well, how about your own workplace? Do these conversations get held? Is there challenge? Is there space to reflect with each other? And can we be more proactive in making sure that banter remains banter and the bullying stops? So thank you so much for being here today. We have got this QR code on the screen. We'd really value your feedback, whether that's to ask for more support, whether it's to share your thoughts. But by all means, please tell us if there's something that could be done better. We want to keep running these sessions and creating this space for you. So thank you so much. I am now going to stop recording. And then what we should be able to do is then have some feedback space and think about